Greetings from Trinity-Pawling School, and welcome to our second edition of Pride Perspectives, conversations with our community. Last week, we had a great conversation with our chair of the board, Headmaster Taylor, and a couple of other administrators. Tonight, we have the privilege of hearing from Roberta Lidl, our director of the Center for Learning Achievement, as well as Headmaster Taylor. And as these webinars have been going recently, the Q&A button on your screen will be available tonight. So at any point that you have a question, please do not hesitate to chime in. We're going to have our presentation for the first 15, 20 minutes or so, and then we'll get to the Q&A. So please be patient as we move through the program. And as I said, this is our second series of our Pride Perspectives, and we will have every Wednesday night for the foreseeable future different programming. So please tune in as we move through the spring and into the summer. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over the mic to Headmaster Taylor.
So glad that you could be with us tonight, and we're really excited about this series. We had a good turnout last week, and we've got some great content coming up. So thank you for spending some time. We hope we will hope that it'll be valuable use of your time, and that certainly is our objective. We're going to be talking this evening with Roberta Lidl, who's the director of our Center for Learning Achievement. And I just want to briefly give you sort of a history of where this has come from. And then Roberta will talk a little bit more in depth about it, but also how this is facilitating our remote learning, and hopefully provide you with some tips, if you're parents, things that where you can assist with the remote learning. But the Center for Learning Achievement is the latest iteration in the evolution of our work with learning differences that began at Trinity-Pawling in 1975 with the creation of what was then called the Language Retraining Program. We were finding, or they were finding at the time, specifically Ted and Carol Neeland, who founded the program, they were discovering that we had students who initially were undiagnosed dyslexics, the term that was widely used then, language-based learning differences. And they studied this, and they developed a program that was a modification of Orton Gillingham that used phonics and language analysis to teach the students compensatory strategies to work around their learning difference, to embrace it, to develop strategies where they could be successful academically. And this program evolved, and then it became, in its nomenclature, the language program. But as our general awareness of learning differences broadened, when attention deficit disorder became identified as being an influence in learning. We sort of adapted the language retraining program, and had students that had ADHD and so forth. And then as that evolved into a recognition of executive skills issues and challenges, all of that was being funneled into this language program. And about 5 years ago, we decided we needed to be more specific. Roberta and her team were already sort of tweaking the program for the language-based learning differences to meet the needs of the executive skills students who were in this program. We sort of took a step back and said, okay, if we could rebuild this, how would we do it? And so we created the Center for Learning Achievement. And Roberta, would you please describe sort of the four spokes of the Center for Learning Achievement?
Absolutely, Bill. I'm thrilled to have this opportunity to talk about it. As you know, it's a passion project of mine, and I can go on forever. So I'll try to kind of be brief. And if people want more information about it, they can reach out to me. But it basically consists of 3 signature programs. One being the LEAD program, which is the one that was created in the 70s, which we have. As we have learned new information, we have adjusted accordingly. We've learned so much about learning differences and how specifically boys learn. And we've taken that modified Orton-Gillingham. We've added the executive functioning component because we know that there's often comorbidity with some of our students that are in our LEAD program. And it's basically a 2-year program that has a remedial component, and it's systematic, sequential, and it builds upon the foundations. It fills in the gaps. It builds automaticity so that we can free up cognitive space, basically, so they can do higher level thinking. So things become automatic, and that's through repetition and mastery that we get to that point. The second year of the program is literally focusing on the writing, and it's intensive. We are doing analytical writing. I wish everyone, I've said this all the time, I wish everyone could take the analytical writing course, but it's small, it's 5 to 1. It's a wonderful aspect for the boys, and it really polishes off the program and to give them that skill set so they go off to school with the right toolbox. Then we have our executive skills program, which came out of that because we found we had a population that had executive functioning challenges, but didn't fit the criteria for the language-based learning difference. So instead of making this independent one-on-one where we were creating opportunities to connect with them, we created a program, and we've written curriculum for it, and we utilize that curriculum. We've gotten training specifically for that, but we find that we have to individualize it, and that's a 2 to 1, and it's basically a 1 course. We've had students that have taken it more than 1 year because they haven't mastered those skills, or sometimes they just need that extra support if they're transitioning, possibly for getting ready for college. The English Mastery Program is the 3rd signature program, and that is for our international population, which was an interesting thing, came out of a student advocating for himself, was watching his roommate do the phonics piece and realized that that's what he needed to build his academic fluency. And we had never tried that. We had never thought about it. He advocated for himself. He asked his father if he could get in the program. So he was our test pilot, and we recognized rather rapidly that this systematic sequential approach to learning language is exactly what builds English, academic English fluency, which is very different from conversational. So we're working on those 4 aspects of it. It follows the exact same path as the LEAD program, except for there's those pieces that we focus on for the international population. I always battle that it's not an ESL program or an ELL program because of the systematic sequential approach. And then finally, we have this like 4th spoke, which really emphasizes on the broader support provided to and by the entire community. So it includes the Allen Reading and Writing Lab, which our teachers, all of our content teachers, provide support in. It's an opportunity for them to do one-on-one help, to do group help, not only academically, but in skills, in writing, in general, just awareness, even just listening. That's a passion project of mine. We also provide information for our content teachers. So when we have a student that comes in one of our signature programs, we develop a scenario of and recommendations of what is good for them, what supports them. We collaborate constantly. We include the advisor in that. We have weekly executive skills meetings with our Dean of Residential Life, our Dean of Students, our Dean of Counseling, and our executive skills teachers. We also have the accommodations are built into our program. So we don't follow IEPs or 504s traditionally because we find that they're pretty cookie cutter. But we do it in the structure of our school. We do it with the extra help. We do it with the collaboration and the sharing of information, the brainstorming. I'm so proud of our whole community and how we rally around the students when they're having difficulty. We don't have every profile. We are learning as we go sometimes, but everybody is supporting that. And we make sure that we're supporting the teachers. Another thing that we do is we do a form advisor meeting. So if someone is really struggling, we have all of the teachers tell the form advisors, and we talk about more formal approaches to try and support them, not just academically, but in all areas, because we know executive functioning goes far beyond just the classroom.
Yeah, and those form advisors meetings are weekly, every week, and they are strategic. We develop strategies and we check back the next week. How did that work, and so forth. So it's very collaborative. And as you talk about the center, the threads that are woven through it are relationships and communication and coordination. So, Roberta, what role does empathy play in the overall learning environment of Trinity-Pawling, and specifically within the Center of Learning Achievement?
Well, empathy cultivates connection. And I feel it's like the number one goal for learning. So it creates a place to be heard, to feel included, and to feel valued. And that is at the core, specifically in the Center of Learning Achievement, that is at the core of who we are. I'm very biased by my team because they have a very large heart. Their empathy for the students under the most difficult of circumstances sometimes is amazing. They're resilient. They don't take it personally. Their inability to, the best thing I think is their inability to suppress joy. Because when something happens that's really positive, even for our students, whether they're in our program or in the general population, we can't help but group celebrate. We have this really interesting app or a text group that we use, that we are constantly like, hey, did you hear? Or when we're in the academic building, when we have the pleasure of being in the academic building, we run down the hall to tell the smallest of successes, because we know that strength-based approach is what really matters. And so we have to focus on that component, and our heart is right there. So empathy, and I think that's across the board. And when we communicate with our teachers, we get that opportunity for them to see it from that connection. So we've had the experience. We know that it's Groundhog Day and you have to do it again and again and again. But when you get that success, you can't help but just overflow with joy and pride. And as we explain to teachers where it's coming from, they get it. And that's another success that we have to just celebrate, when the teachers are expanding their understanding of this population.
Yeah, I remember a faculty meeting a couple of years ago, and I'll always remember this faculty meeting because one of your colleagues in the Center for Learning Achievement made a comment. This faculty meeting, we were showing off students' winter projects, which is part of our practicum for civic leadership at Trinity-Pawling. And we were showing highlights of students who had excelled in their project. And this one student had essentially built a go-kart, but it was like a car. Mm-hmm. And the amount of discipline that this student had to do and planning that the student had to execute to do the sequential aspects of how to construct something like this and have it run, and he drove it around the quad. And one of the teachers literally in this faculty meeting was in tears, and it was his teacher in the tutorial. Yep. And saying that, showing how successful he was in this, because he can be challenged in other areas of learning, but here was a way that he could demonstrate his learning in ways that touched into his passions and where he was immensely successful. So that empathy is so critical. Roberta, you mentioned a couple of times, you mentioned the curriculum. So how important is it that the Center for Learning Achievement is built on a curricular foundation rather than on a foundation that is relying on tutors for extra help?
Well, our program is unique because it has a curriculum. Many of our many schools out there have a support center now. It's now that the conversations have started about learning differences and our awareness has broadened to the public, we see that happening. But our curriculum is research based. It bases on skill mastery. It's versus product. So when you're tutoring someone, when you're sitting down and you're doing tutoring time, you're focusing on the product. We want to make sure that the product gets done. But we know that curriculum and the systematic sequential way that we approach the curriculum builds mastery, and that translates to other classes, and that translates to skills beyond academia. So when they get in their professional life, to have these compensatory strategies, to understand their strengths, to understand when they need to shore up some skills, that can be taught, and we know that. And it's kind of interesting with our program right now, we're seeing, because of the really scaffold support at the beginning of the year and the way that we follow our curriculum. One of my teachers said the other day, it's kind of on autopilot right now because they've already got that foundation, what I love to call housebreaking. They understand those skills, they've mastered them. So now going forward, we're polishing, we're building automaticity. And now they're starting to see how that relates to other fields. The other thing is supporting the faculty. We are unique in the way that we are a can-do kind of department, and our colleagues come to us frequently. And I may not even hear about it. It might be one of my teachers where they've connected with a content teacher and they're coming up with a strategy, and I hear about it afterwards and just get to celebrate. And I'm full of pride over what my teachers are doing and what our colleagues are doing. We understand that we have to promote empathy. So that's probably the big thing with our curriculum too, is in that piece, we have to have tremendous patience. And we meet the boys where they are, and we know that not every scenario works for every kid. So we have to think about differentiated instruction within this. We have to convey that to teachers. That's all part of our curriculum, and even our executive skills curriculum. We have very clear goals.
And what strikes me, and I spent 14 years leading another school that didn't have a program like this. But what strikes me is what the Center for Learning Achievement can do for all the faculty and all the students at Trinity-Pawling, because it creates a richer learning environment for everybody, and that's critical. And we know that learning takes best when it happens in community, and we know that even more now when we haven't been able to be together as a community. So from your perspective as somebody with expertise in learning, how are we doing with remote learning in the Center for Learning Achievement? And what have you learned, what have we learned from our experience where we can grow better?
Right. Well, my team and I meet every week. Well, we have a formal meeting every week since even prior to us deciding to go to this remote learning environment. We were discussing things, and just recently I kind of asked them what we've learned, what's working, what's not working, what do we need to tweak, how do we need to look at this if it continues, or can we utilize some of this information for next year? And so we've realized that the classroom looks very different. It's a 2D, two-dimensional component. We don't know. We can't help them with those subtleties. We we've lost the subtle cues, all that information that we have learned to be really sensitive to. We've lost that. We've lost the certain structure, but I have to say that administratively that everyone's done a great job of creating a schedule that has some structure, and I'm hearing feedback from parents that that's really working well. We're having problems with assessments. We usually do assessments at the end of the year. We got to get a little creative. We might devalidate them, but we're looking at the information that we're going to gather for them. So we definitely learned that that cognitive flexibility. We have to be adaptable. We have to have flexibility. The teachers are much more vulnerable than they've ever been. And they definitely need to have some faith in some of what the kids are doing. And we also, connection is really our goal. There are boundaries. Some kids are having difficulty with Wi-Fi. Some kids are struggling with the pandemic and what that's doing, and the fear and anxiety. There's so many aspects. My teachers have learned that they have to communicate in a few different ways. I have a teacher that's breaking all the rules when we talk about this and trying to advocate them for independence, but he's emailing his entire class 10 minutes before, like, okay, guys, let's go. It's class time. So he's fulfilling that executive function for that piece, but what he's getting out of it is engagement. And so if that's one aspect we gotta, shore up until we can scaffold it, until we can show some more independence, we'll do that. I have a teacher that after their class, she emails them and she kind of goes through what they've covered and make sure that they are connecting with her on another way. I have a teacher who's Snapchatting, which I'm not sure that's our best avenue, but it's working for now because we have to make that connection. I'm doing the same thing. I'm texting students directly, which, it's giving that instant connection. When they're feeling anxiety, they feel closer. It's working for us. We are using our content teachers and our advisors on a whole different plane. So you and I have talked about that in great detail, and I'm loving that. It's developing better pathways. It's developing more insight into our population, which, this population flows in and out of our program. So executive skills, we're all in that place where different levels of developing executive skills. I think that the thing that's the most challenging for us is making sure that we're paying attention, we're taking the pulse on the kids, we're making sure that that they feel supported, that they are they okay? Are they okay? Because that's the number one thing for me right now. It's not the content. It's knowing that they're aware that we're here for them. But Bill, you and I had talked recently about how impressed I was over your understanding in that, and I was wondering how you thought of how the remote learning is going for us, from your perspective, because I'm in the trenches with the support and I'm doing the triage and stuff like that, but you're coming from a little bit different perspective.
Yeah. But I would certainly agree with you that we're learning, and we're discovering things that we know already. So it's not really a discovery, but we know that learning takes place when it involves flexibility and reflection and self-awareness and humility. So, we had 4 objectives when we had to quickly put together this remote learning plan. And there were 4 main areas that we knew we needed to cover, but we had to cover in such a way that they had to work together, like gears working together. The 4 areas were the delivery of content. And you know what? This happened in the spring. So you know, a lot of the content and a lot of those structures were built through the course of the year. So, you know, there was some new content to deliver, but in terms of skill work, we were just reinforcing the structures that we had been built. And we knew that we were not going to be able to deliver as much content remotely as we would in person. So we accepted that. We reinforced that to the teachers. You're not going to get it all done, what you had planned. So prioritize. We wanted to make sure that we created some virtual community. We knew that not everyone was going to come to the morning meeting on Mondays, or the chapels on Tuesdays and Fridays, or the club block that we have, or the roundtable block that we have, or the chance for connections in the evening. But we wanted to create that because we knew that some would, and indeed many are. They're connecting, and we're doing fun, creative ways to keep people connected. We knew we needed to be attentive to mental health. You know, it's ironic, right? For educators who have been telling kids for years, you're spending too much time behind a screen, to now just say, okay, now we're going to rely on it. And so we knew we needed to be attentive to mental health. So we have check-ins with a wellness team comprised of our Dean of Counseling and our chaplain and our Dean of Residential Life and others. And students can go in and into these meetings and talk about feelings of loss. I mean, there's a lot of feelings of grief amongst the seniors, and we know that the grief has stages, and we're working to help them through this sense of loss. So that had to be a third piece. And then the fourth piece is really sort of the net result of this. But if the three pieces don't work together, we don't get to the fourth objective. And the fourth objective was to build resiliency assets for the students. We know how important resiliency assets are in adolescence. We know how important they are in transition to adulthood. So all of these four objectives had to work together. A couple weeks ago, we started getting feedback. I was getting feedback from students. Hey, the work is starting to really pile up. And so that was a red flag, because if the work is piling up, then the mental health piece was going to get out of sync, and then people weren't going to be engaged with the virtual community. And so we worked with the faculty who had all the best of intentions, but we said, okay, you have permission to dial it back. I was telling them, you have permission to dial it back, and they did. So, Roberta, as an expert in learning, what are some suggestions you can offer to parents, how they can help with meeting the challenges of remote learning at home, since now they are, they have become teachers and tutors and teachers' aides and all that?
That's right. Well, and there's various levels of engagement because of family situations. I think the biggest thing, and Bill, you just spoke of it, is to find balance. We have to find balance. And I think we by design, I think that we hit really close to the mark with our schedule of finding balance for them and making sure they incorporate, sleep and eating healthy and exercise and just joy, humor. And, humor is a great anxiety reliever. Some of that has to play into this routine, this new platform. I know with my students, and I know that my teachers have talked about this, that usually the first 4 or 5 minutes of their Zoom meeting is just checking in, just like, how you doing? I tease I have a new student that happened to come late in the spring, started our Trinity-Pawling in the spring, and it's really funny because my first thing I asked him, I was like, did you make your bed? It's just something that connects with them to just some normalcy. So parents, if they can help in any way, they're in the trenches with us. They have to be a part of this. They have to, and they might only be one piece. I just read an email, and I think you might even have gotten it from a parent today. It was shared with me about how fabulous they're doing with this. So, we know that there's a certain population that's thriving with us, and we're all, our jaw is dropping because we're like, but sometimes the distractions, the lack of distractions, and their own organizational component really plays a role. And the parent, the only executive functioning component they had to do was get them out of bed. And then they were excited because they were trying to design and structure how this is going to work for them. And it got rid of some distractions. I also know that there's some evidence that there's a big difference between the introvert and the extrovert. So for the introvert, this is kind of working, but the screen thing isn't working so well. So that's sometimes hard for people to sit. I know I had said to you that, this gallery, sometimes when I see the gallery of faces, it's hard for me to focus. It's hard for me to really focus in on whoever's talking or getting any depth of content. So helping kids with that, we are aware of that. That's a communication thing. So if parents are being aware of that, talk to us. Encouraging them to participate in some of our events that are going on. That creates connection. I always get tremendous joy out of when I see the kids on Monday morning meeting, and and they're all sitting there in their various levels of being prepared and engaged, and it just brings a smile to my face, because that's the biggest thing I think I miss right now, is that day-to-day interaction with the students, that just and my team and my colleagues. It warms my heart when I see them. So if they can get involved, it really does generate that. I think that also making sure that the kids are part of this process. So asking them what's working for them, what's not working for them, going down that path and making them part of it. My teachers, we talk about all kinds of methods, and actually any teachers I've been talking to, we talk about what's working with a certain student. All kinds of organizational methods are working differently. They some of them are having really hard time with cognitive control, impulsivity, shifting, getting ready for the class, all of those things. Rituals make that easier. We know that our structure of our school, when we are on campus, builds that for our kids. It helps that become a model. So I think the biggest thing that parents can do is just get in the trenches with us and just communicate with us how we can help test the waters, try to build some regular routines, and we're working on our end. But as I think about this, Bill, and I was talking to you recently, and I was so impressed by your depth of knowledge of the Center for Learning Achievement. And I really want to know what your vision is as we go forward for the Center for Learning Achievement, because as you know, this is my passion project, and it goes far beyond our students that are enrolled in this program. And we see that. We see how we can support everyone. We can support our colleagues. We can support our community. But I just love to hear you share why you think that the learning achievement is so important to the vision of Trinity-Pawling.
Sure, happy to do that. I first want to just add my word of appreciation to our parents who may be watching tonight, who are helping out at home and being supportive and giving us feedback. It's invaluable support. So thank you very much. My wife taught in the language retraining program during our first go round at Trinity-Pawling, and so I have that appreciation, but and the knowledge of the boys that she taught and their tremendous growth. We did an exercise 4 years ago called the Portrait of a Graduate, and you can see it on our website. It's under the Why Trinity-Pawling tab, and this was an exercise in essentially working backward. We wanted to envision what our graduates looked like, what kind of skill sets they had, and then to step back and make sure that we were, building delivery vehicles that were going to get to these objectives. But there are 5 main objectives. We want our graduates to be critical thinkers. So what are we doing to develop those skills? To have thoughtful collaboration, to be effective communicators, to be ethical citizens. And the 5th is to develop a deep foundation of self-awareness. Mm-hmm. And this is where, this is the connection between the Center for Learning Achievement weaves its way through all of those areas. And so it's an integral and interwoven aspect of our objectives. It is a delivery vehicle for many of those 5 areas. But I want to just speak very briefly about how it relates to self-awareness. So by self-awareness, we want our graduates to know, to have confidence, first of all. We want them to have an awareness of their gifts and talents. We want to have them have an awareness of their passions. This is where the practicum for civic leadership comes in. So sort of teaching boys how to even explore their interests. But we want them to be aware of their potential, but we also want them to know how they learn. And if their learning is going to be aided by that awareness of their passions, but also the development of skill sets where there are compensatory strategies where they can turn what was at one time perhaps a challenge or a weakness, if they can turn that into a strength and help them navigate college and life beyond because of what we were able to teach them at Trinity-Pawling, I can't think of anything more gratifying than that. So, the Center for Learning Achievement is deeply connected to my vision for how this school moves forward, lives out its mission, and achieves its goals, and continues to learn and grow. And Roberta, I want to thank you and your team for all that you're doing in that collective enterprise, and for the leadership and education you're giving to all of the faculty that you're helping to enable us all to meet these goals. I do want to just add one word of clarification, because I think Roberta and I have both used the word texting, and it's important for our new parents who are on the line to know we're not. We have a special platform that it's called Parent Square, where we can text parents and we can text students, but it's not going to their. It is going to their cell phone, but it's running through a central server. So it's not a form of communication that's outside. It's like email. So
Bill, the nice part about it is that phone numbers don't have to be exchanged. Right. I think it's the greatest part, is that everybody's on a server and you can find them without knowing anything in terms of their home phone number or their cell phone or anything like that. So are we ready for some questions?
Sure.
Because we've got a number of them, and they range from some current parents and some new parents that have joined us. But I think the first one is actually the one that just came in, and I think we have 2 sides of this. But have you found some kids feeling less intimidated and more empowered in the Zoom classroom than maybe in the regular classroom, and so thriving and being confident? And then I will add to that, what are some of the kids that normally have been fantastic in the classroom, for lack of a better term, and are struggling with the Zoom and the lack of communication person to person? So I know Roberta or Bill, you can chime in. But just as a reminder, we do have a lot of questions.
Okay.
So let's try to be brief, but succinct. Thank you.
Okay. Well, we have seen both sides. We have seen very specific, some of them have surprised us, people that are thriving, that are, miss that daily communication, miss those subtle cues, miss the camaraderie of the everyday. That's really hard for them. And I think we're dealing with that by communicating, by giving them opportunities, by being empathetic. Our students that are thriving, it's really interesting. Some of them, it's just really limiting their distractions. So in their environment, they are prepared. So for some of the students that are in our programs, the first thing that the teachers did was make sure their learning environment was okay, that they had their materials, that everything was set up. So it was, they weren't diving in their locker or in their room trying to find their pieces. It was already set up, and then those regular checks. So it's interesting. We're learning a lot, and we're taking all this data in, and we're preparing. We're thinking about some of the things that we're going to have to create for next year. Models, very clear, concise models that scaffold what we need. Also, possibly building some of these lessons that we do two-dimensional. So if they are, even if they're sick and home, we have a way of connecting with them.
Yeah, I would just simply add, I teach a course, so I'm teaching, twice a week, and and getting work back and so forth. And so I'm seeing that. I'm seeing a variety of different levels of engagement. But what I found is helpful is flexibility and understanding. Some boys who never are late turning work in, I may have to send them an email, say, hey, don't forget to turn that writing reflection in. And they'll do it, and I'm not counting off for being late. I mean, they're going through a lot. So
okay, let's go to another question. And I know that Bill, I'm going to go to you on this one because the question has a little bit to do with your lovely term or the one that you don't like very much is vigor. As opposed to rigor, which again, so the question is, academic challenge at Trinity-Pawling, not only in this time of remote learning, but I think in general. So I don't know if you want to dive into your rigor versus vigor conversation, but I think it has a lot to do with what maybe this question is coming from.
Sure. JP, you're right. I do not like, and I do not use the term rigor. And I haven't for a long time. Because I think it presents a presentation of learning that is inconsistent with my own objectives as a teacher and as a school leader, and with the schools that I've been associated with. And instead of rigor, I use the term vigor. And here's how I distinguish between the two. Rigor is something that is imposed upon you. It is a teacher imposing a strict set of objectives and standards onto you. And by extension, a school doing the same thing. Vigor, it is the energy that is released from within. Someone who is vigorous is releasing energy. So I think of our program as vigorous. Another way to look at it is, rigor is, rigor mortis is using the same term, and that's death. And so vigorous is life. And so I want our program to instill energy, to to unleash creativity, to be challenging, of course, but challenging in the ways that promote self-awareness, that lead to those objectives of a portrait of a graduate. And that's going to be personalized, not something that's imposed, something, energy that is released from within, that is personalized, but comes as a result of being challenged to grow.
Bill, I'd like to add to that is that, especially with our curriculum, or that we don't lower the bar for our students. We have great expectations for them in terms of their academic growth, their personal growth, their developmental growth. And so we might come up with differentiated instruction or different measures, especially for the student that you were speaking of, who, created that model. That was an amazing, that measures so many skill sets. But we're going to help them meet the gap between our expectations and their skill sets. And that's our job there, is to fill that gap, in our structure and in our teaching.
So you had mentioned, Bill, with some of the responses from our boys a couple weeks ago in dialing back on the homework. And one of the questions was, with the remote schedule that was created, is there homework at night, or is there time in the day for them to be finishing that work?
Yes, we created a schedule that had both synchronous and asynchronous learning blocks that were scheduled. And so I teach class period 2. I have 2 synchronous blocks a week where I am helping to deliver content. And then there are 2 asynchronous blocks into the schedule where the boys are working on assignments that I have given them to reinforce the content that I have delivered synchronously. So yes, there's time in the schedule. And because we wanted to protect time. We wanted to make sure that if they wanted to exercise, they could exercise. They have dinner with their family, see their friends via Zoom or FaceTime or whatever. And so yeah, some students are probably working a little beyond that asynchronous block, but and that's what we were dialing back. Okay, they're going to work a little bit beyond, but well beyond it is not the purpose of the schedule.
Right. And another aspect of that with the remote learning, and you had mentioned, I'm not sure who, but that parents need to get, in the trenches and be involved in this. But the question is, are parents sitting in on any of the classes and just in the room to observe? So is that okay? Is it frowned upon? No parent wants to intrude, but I'm sure they sure would love to be a fly on the wall. So what's your response to that?
I haven't heard of any parents intruding. In fact, I think because this is high school and there's a certain level of independence, and that's what we're cultivating, parents are pretty aware that they're well supported by their teachers, and that the communication channels are clear, and the students are actually rising to the occasion. So I haven't experienced that. I'm sure there are aspects, like I said, I had a parent who was waking their child up, making sure they're kind of in front of things, maybe checking in if the way I handle it is I communicate directly with the student. I kind of do it once, do it twice, and then if there's no response, I'm kind of like, okay, this is a team approach now. So when I say in the trenches, there's little things that we can do to tweak, but there are situations where parents are not able to do that right now. So their jobs and their livelihood or the learning environment is not allowing that. So and that's where we get into those discussions and come up with the best scenarios so that they can demonstrate their mastery of the information and the content and go from there.
I haven't heard of parents in any classes. I have, I've had in my own advisory groups, I've had parents pop in and wave because they want to see the other kids, and then they wave and they say hello, and then they pop out.
Yeah.
So a couple of the next questions do revolve around executive functioning. And so one of them, and I'm just going to kind of list a couple of off, but as a student graduates from the executive skills program, what supports are there afterwards? What types of goals do these boys, not only these boys, but I think any of them in the Center for Learning Achievement, what sorts of goals do you have for them? And I think another one that sort of is overarching, and we may have already touched on it, but are we seeing a growth of executive functioning this spring? The silver lining within this paradigm is the question. So it's a lot about executive skills, executive functioning. And just before you answer, if you have questions, if you're on the line, you have questions more about the Center for Learning Achievement, about executive functioning, about the LEAD program, don't hesitate to reach out to me, or we have our admissions at Trinity-Pawling. Roberta Lidl is always happy to discuss any of these questions. But I guess if we go back to it, what are the goals? What's the support system like afterwards? And are we seeing a growth in this ever-changing world in that aspect?
Well, so executive functioning, our first step is developing self-awareness. So they need to understand their own strengths and weaknesses. I like to break up executive functioning into three places, three controls. So it's a behavioral control, an emotional control, and a cognitive control. So behavioral control is, inhibition. So, and self-monitoring, when all of a sudden there's a text, are you aware that all of a sudden you are not paying attention? Emotional control is the reaction and the responses, and also the ability to shift if you're passionate or something about that and being able to shift. And then the cognitive control is also to initiate tasks, your intention, your organization, your planning. So, we know that all people develop this over time, and younger are usually executive skills. And I always smile because I look at my colleagues, and we all have our strengths and weaknesses and how we learn and how our executive skills have developed. And for our students that have clear deficits in their executive skills, it's kind of brought to the surface in the way we talk to them. So it might be in the, hey, pay attention, or hey, you didn't get that done, or so in our language becomes our awareness. And when we set a goal, we start with collaborating with them. So there's clear and concise goals. And the thing with the executive functioning program is, like I said previously, we had a set curriculum, and we know that has to be changed for every single scenario because every student has different needs. So in the executive functioning program, it's a 2-to-1. And we do these evaluations and the assessments on places that they're struggling. We have them do a reflection journal, so they kind of build self-awareness on how they're doing academically, how they're doing relationally, how they're doing residentially. So it kind of becomes this place where they can tell their perspective, and then we can review the data with them. And build some clarity. And we're also building common language. And I think that's the big piece. And we're working on that campus-wide, so that they have language that doesn't have a negative indication to it. So
well, I think that sorry to interrupt, but that to me, it's campus-wide is also the fact that, we're all boys here. So let's be honest, we all have a little executive skills that we could tighten up. And we always talk about our toolbox,
right,
and sharpening those tools. And I think not only that small percentage of boys that are actually in the executive skills program, but the rest of our campus, our teachers are there to support those needs, that fourth prong of the Center for Learning Achievement that we talk about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so we do set goals. We set short-term goals, long-term goals. We teach them how to break it down, because that's the step is we know that knowledge isn't the problem. It's the doing. It's the doing. So these are really smart young men that just don't know how to get to the point where they can get, the follow through. So we help them break it down. We scaffold it. We come up with scenarios, but they have to be part of the conversation. We know that, I'll pull a planner out that works really well for me. And it may not work for this young man, but we have to have that conversation, but we have to get them working on something. They have to take a step in the right direction. And we're supporting them all the way. And our goal is independence. So I don't want to be their frontal lobe for 4 years and then they go off to college and we have to find someone new to be their frontal lobe to do that executive functioning component. So our hope is it's 1 year. Some students, especially if they're ninth grade and they really have a lot of gaps in their executive functioning, or it hits more areas, that might take 2 years. We assess it every March. We look at it. We talk about it. I talk about it with our Dean of Residential Life and our Dean of Students and our counselor, our Dean of Counseling. And we kind of assess what we think is the best scenario. And we do a recommendation. We talk to the parents about it. Like I said, we've had scenarios where we've had students that were really, they don't need any more coaching, but they had a new scenario and they really didn't know how to transfer it. So they were getting ready for college. And so it was really a checking in. It was kind of taking the pulse on their decision-making.
Sure.
And they've done an amazing job, as they've gone off to college, and that's our goal. So,
and the beauty of the Allen Reading and Writing Lab is that they're always welcome to come back and say hello, just to chat or just to say for some extra help. But we're going to go to our last question.
Can I reiterate one thing?
Yes.
That and I know it's been said, but I want to underscore it. Because in compared to the totality, we don't have the majority of our students are not in the LEAD program, not in the ESP program, not in the EMP program. Not even close to the majority. It's like a quarter or around there.
That's exactly. Yep.
Yeah, but the richness of this program extends to all of the instruction and extends to all of the students. And this gets back to the question about the vision part. I mean, it makes us better teachers. It makes us better educators. It makes us a richer school. And it's benefiting everybody.
Right. We know that these practices, that the structures, it's good. It's just good practice. It's good methodology. Differentiated learning or differentiated instruction is good for the entire population. It's a broader net. And when we take that approach, it really works well. But I also wanted to add, JP, is that when a student has graduated, quote unquote, graduated from our program, we are still there. I probably have more students that I taught or been in our programs in 9th and 10th grade in their senior year. That I see them more than probably I saw them in their regular classes. And sometimes it's just to celebrate, it's just to hear what they've done, to just be an ear for them, or a place of connection. It really is. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. So last question, and it's actually kind of geared towards summertime. And, what are some suggestions that you would give to parents who were going from, remote learning to next fall? Are there, and of course, please, again, reach out to us if you have specific questions, but how what recommendations for parents as we move into the summer to keep them engaged in, obviously we want them out and having fun, but what are some ways for their, just to keep their brain engaged, active, and ready for the fall?
Right. Well, I always kind of lean on the passion. So pieces that, that they find joy in, and then incorporating some of those skills into it. I'm working with a student right now who actually builds flies and builds lures, and he carves them and paints them, and is, it's very specific. And we have been talking about this, and I said, well, what are you going to do over the summer? How are we going to engage in this? And he's talking about, he's like, well, I really want to sell them. And I'm like, this is an entrepreneurial thing, so let's develop that. So in that comes skill sets. It becomes
Have we lost?
Must have lost Roberta.
We were wondering if this was going to happen, and she's going to be so embarrassed. But Bill, why don't you keep going for a couple more?
I was going to, we obviously didn't know what these questions are going to be, but that was where I was going to go too, is diving into passions. And then, creating, maybe skill exercises that are around those passions. So if somebody, to use Roberta's example, is fishing lures, what's some reading? Maybe read A River Runs Through It, which is a wonderful book. Exactly. And because, reading is exercise for the brain. And if you can combine it with some independent work on a passion, then, that's like a perfect combination.
Exactly.
You're back, Roberta. Welcome back.
I know. I have, thank goodness I've had the positive connection so far, because it's been, there's our cognitive flexibility, right? We adapting to the situation.
60 minutes. So that was pretty good. So I think, ladies and gentlemen, again, thank you so much for joining us. If we fail to answer a question, please do not hesitate to reach out to any one of us, the Center for Learning Achievement team, the admissions office, your advisor. If you're a current student, please talk to your advisor about next year. Or if you're an incoming student, give me a call. I'm actually in my office here, and I'd love to answer anything that you might need to talk about. And as we say every night, and Bill, why don't you send us off with a final goodbye for the night?
Well, just thank you for being a part of this evening. We value your interests, we value your engagement, and we really look forward to seeing you in person.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. Stay safe and healthy, and we'll see you next week on the Pride Perspectives coming at you all spring. So thanks again, and have a great night.